Grace lay on her deathbed, her body frail and withered as if the weight of decades had crushed her spirit into dust. At 50, she looked 80, her once vibrant beauty stolen by years of toil and heartbreak. The small, drafty room in the village house smelled of mildew and regret, a fitting end to a life spent in sacrifice. She had buried her dreams long ago when her husband Jack died in a landslide, leaving her to raise their twins and care for his paralyzed mother. She had scrubbed bedpans daily, endured curses, and watched her youth slip away, all for a family that never valued her. Now gnarled and trembling, her hands clutched the thin blanket, her only shield against the cold seeping through the cracked walls. As her breath grew shallow, footsteps echoed outside the door. Grace's heart flickered with hope. Perhaps her children had come to say goodbye, to offer a final moment of love. She struggled to lift her head, her vision blurry, and squinted toward the entrance. The door creaked open, and there stood Jack alive, his face smug and unaged, a cruel mockery of the years she had lost. Beside him was Emily, the village chief's daughter, her youthful glow contrasting with Grace's decay. Emily's hand rested possessively on Jack's arm, her smile sharp as a blade. Grace's chest tightened, her mind reeling. Jack wasn't dead. The landslide, grief, and endless labor had all been a lie. "Grace, Jack," said his voice dripping with condescension. "I wasn't dead. I've been living with Emily. We're doing great thanks to you. You took care of my mother, kept her out of our way. Emily's had a comfortable life because of it." He chuckled as if her suffering was a joke. Emily smirked, her eyes glinting with triumph. Grace's gaze shifted to her children standing in the shadows, their faces cold and unfamiliar. One of them, her son, spoke without meeting her eyes. "Don't worry, Mom. Dad and Aunt Emily will give you a proper burial. But Dad wants to be buried with Grandma, so you'll go alone." The words pierced Grace like shards of glass. Her children, whom she had raised through sleepless nights and endless hunger, had chosen Emily over her. Jack's mother, whose paralysis Grace had tended to for years, had been part of the ruse, her curses a calculated act to break Grace's spirit. The betrayal burned hotter than any pain she had ever known. Tears streamed down her face, not from sorrow, but from a rage so fierce it consumed her. Her heart pounded, her vision darkened, and she felt her life slipping away. "If I had another chance," she whispered, her voice a venomous vow, "I'd make you all pay." As her world faded, a vision enveloped her. She stood in a misty void, surrounded by the faint outlines of her ancestors, their faces stern yet sorrowful. A woman's voice, ancient and resonant, spoke. "Grace, your suffering has not gone unseen. Your heart's fire has earned you a second chance. Return to your youth armed with truth and forge a new path. But beware, vengeance is a heavy burden." The mist swirled, and Grace felt a jolt as if her soul were being pulled through time. Her eyes snapped open, and she gasped, her hands clutching not a blanket but a hoe, her body young and strong again. She was in the fields, the sun warm on her skin, her belly swollen with pregnancy. Aunt May, a kind neighbor, frowned at her. "Grace, you're pregnant. You shouldn't be working so hard. Doesn't Jack care about you?" Grace's heart raced, her mind a whirlwind of past and present. She touched her youthful hands, marveling at their strength, and looked down at her flat, pregnant belly. The memories of her past life flooded back: Jack's lies, his mother's cruelty, Emily's betrayal, and her children's disloyalty. She had been reborn not by chance, but by the will of her ancestors who had seen her pain and granted her this gift. Tears welled not of weakness, but of overwhelming joy and resolve. She wasn't the naive city girl who had married Jack against her parents' warnings. She was a woman forged in fire, armed with the knowledge of her enemy's deceit. Inside, Grace's emotions churned. The betrayal had carved a hollow in her soul, but this second chance filled it with purpose. She remembered her parents' pleas, their warnings about Jack's charm and the village's hardships. She had ignored them, stubborn and in love, trading her city household registration, a ticket to a better life, for a marriage built on lies. Jack had claimed he was a factory director, but after the wedding, he admitted he was merely a relative of one. The factory lent them for the ceremony. She had wanted to leave then, but pregnancy trapped her. Now, with her ancestors' blessing, she could rewrite her story. Grace straightened, her eyes blazing with determination. She would not repeat her past life's mistakes. Jack, his mother Emily, they would face her wrath. She would reclaim her power, protect her city registration, and ensure they suffered as she had. "Auntie," she said, her voice steady, despite the storm within, "I'm not feeling well. I'll head home." As she walked the muddy village road, each step felt like a declaration of war. She wasn't just Grace anymore. She was a force reborn to deliver justice, and hell awaited those who had wronged her. Grace stood frozen in the field, the hoe slipping from her hands. as Aunt May's concerned voice echoed in her ears. "Grace, you're pregnant. You shouldn't be out here breaking your back. Doesn't Jack care about you?" The words pierced through the haze of her rebirth, grounding her in this new reality. The sun beat down on the dusty village field, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold deathbed she had left moments ago, or was it decades? Her youthful, firm, and unmarred hands trembled as she touched her face, feeling smooth skin instead of wrinkles. Her belly, slightly rounded with early pregnancy, was a reminder of the life she had once carried to term, only to be betrayed by those she loved most. She was back not just in body, but in time, given a second chance by her ancestors' mercy. Aunt May snatched the hoe and water bucket from Grace's grasp, her weathered face creased with worry. "You're overheated, girl. I've watered your plot. Go home and rest." Grace nodded, her throat tight with unspoken gratitude. "Thank you, Auntie. I'll head back now," she said, her voice steady despite the storm. As she turned toward the familiar muddy path to the village, each step stirred memories of her past life, a life of sacrifice, deception, and unrelenting pain. She had walked this road thousands of times, her feet calloused from labor, her heart heavy with blind devotion to Jack. Now, with the clarity of her rebirth, she saw it all for what it was, a trap she had willingly stepped into. Her mind churned with images of her past mistakes. She had been a city girl born with a household registration that promised opportunity, education, jobs, and a life beyond the village's grime. Her parents had begged her not to marry Jack, their voices sharp with fear. "He's charming, Grace, but he's nothing," her mother had said, her eyes brimming with tears. "You'll regret giving up your future for him," her stern and practical father added. "That village will drain you dry. You're meant for more." But Grace, stubborn and smitten, had ignored them, dazzled by Jack's promises of love and a grand life. He claimed he was a factory director, a man of status. After the wedding, the truth unraveled. He was merely a cousin of the director the factory borrowed for their ceremony, his status a lie. She had wanted to leave, to run back to her parents' arms, but the twins growing in her womb anchored her to a life of misery. Now as she walked, Grace's heart ached with regret. She had failed her parents herself and the potential she once held. The memory of their disappointed faces haunted her, their warnings now a bitter echo of truth. Yet beneath the guilt, a fire kindled. Her ancestors' vision had not just returned her to youth, it had armed her with knowledge. Jack's betrayal, faking his death to live with Emily, his mother's feigned paralysis, her children's disloyalty was a wound that fueled her resolve. She would not repeat her past. She would protect her city registration, the one asset Jack's family had coveted, and use it to reclaim her power. Her parents' voices lingered, urging her to fight to make them proud this time. The village came into view, and its ramshackle houses reminded her of the life she had endured. Grace's emotions swirled: grief for her lost years, rage at Jack's deceit, and a burgeoning sense of purpose. She wasn't the naive girl who had married him believing love would conquer all. She was a woman reborn, her heart hardened by betrayal, but softened by the hope of redemption. She thought of her parents again. Their love was a distant light she had pushed away. She had barely seen them after her marriage in her past life, too ashamed to admit her mistake. This time she vowed to mend that bond, to show them she could rise above her past. Grace paused at the edge of the village, her gaze sweeping over the fields where she had toiled for Jack's family. She remembered the hunger, the endless labor, the way Jack's mother hoarded food while Grace went without. Jack had never loved her. He had used her, his charm, as a mask for greed. Emily, the village chief's daughter, had been his genuine desire. Her youth and status were prizes Grace could never match. The realization cut deep, but it also sharpened her focus. She would not be their pawn again. Her city registration, still tied to her parents' record, was her leverage, a ticket to resources and freedom Jack's family could never touch. She would wield it like a weapon. As she resumed her walk, Grace's mind turned strategic. Jack's mother, with her sharp tongue and selfish ways, would be her first target. Emily, smug and complicit, would be next. Jack, the architect of her pain, would face the full weight of her vengeance. But she needed allies, a way out of this village that had caged her. The memory of Secretary Pay, a county official she would soon meet, flickered in her mind. He had been a distant figure in her past life, honorable, but unreachable. She would draw him in this time, use his influence to escape and exact her revenge. Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and exhilaration. She was no longer a victim. She was Grace, reborn to rewrite her story, and she would make them all pay. Grace trudged along the muddy village path, the weight of her past life pressing against the fire of her newfound purpose. The fields stretched endlessly on either side, their golden stalks mocking her with memories of endless labor. Each step stirred a storm of emotions, rage at Jack's betrayal, grief for the years she had lost, and a burning resolve to rewrite her fate. The vision of her ancestors, their solemn promise of a second chance, pulsed in her mind like a heartbeat. She wasn't just a scorned wife anymore. She was a warrior armed with the truth of Jack's deceit and the power of her city household registration. The village loomed ahead, its squat houses hiding the vipers she had once called family. Today she would ignite the spark of her revenge. Her thoughts churned with the details of her past life's misery. With her sharp tongue and greedy hands, Jack's mother hoarded food while Grace starved, and her insults were a daily ritual. Jack, with his charming lies, had faked his death to run off with Emily, the village chief's daughter, leaving Grace to wipe his mother's bedpans and raise children who would later betray her. With her smug beauty, Emily had been the final knife in Grace's heart, stealing not just Jack but the loyalty of her twins. The memory of their cold faces at her deathbed fueled her anger, but Grace pushed it down, channeling it into strategy. She couldn't afford to let rage blind her. This time she would be cunning, turning the village's gossip into a weapon to destroy her enemies. Grace's heart wavered as she neared the house. Beneath her resolve, a flicker of doubt lingered. Could she become the ruthless avenger she needed to be? In her past life, she had been too proud, too proper, swallowing insults to keep the peace. That pride had cost her everything. Now she had to shed it, embrace the raw, unyielding strength of a woman scorned. She thought of her parents, their disappointed eyes when she chose Jack over their warnings. She had cut them off, too ashamed to admit her mistake, and their absence had left a void no sacrifice could fill. This time she vowed to make them proud, to reclaim the life they had wanted for her. Her city registration, still tied to their urban record, was her lifeline, a source of food and fabric coupons Jack's family had exploited. She would guard it fiercely, using it to secure her escape. As the house came into view, Grace's plan crystallized. Jack's mother would be her first target. The older woman's feigned paralysis in her past life had been a cruel ploy to keep Grace chained to the village, a burden to ensure Jack and Emily's freedom. Grace would expose her, turning the village's judgment against her. Jack and Emily would come next, and their affair would be a scandal that she would amplify to ruin their reputations. But she needed allies, someone with power to tip the scales. Secretary Pay's face flashed in her mind, a county official upright and ambitious, who would soon visit the village. In her past life, she had been too broken to approach him. Now she saw him as a key to her freedom, a man whose influence could shatter Jack's hold over her. Grace's emotions surged as she imagined confronting Jack's mother. Part of her wanted to scream, to unleash years of pent-up pain, but she knew better. Shouting alone wouldn't win this war. She had to be strategic, to play the role of the wronged wife while planting seeds of doubt in the villagers' minds. She would make them see Jack's mother as the heartless one, not her. The thought brought a grim smile to her lips, but it faded as she grappled with her transformation. Could she live with the person she was becoming? Grace, who loved Jack and dreamed of a happy family, was gone. A woman forged in betrayal stood in her place, ready to fight dirty. The guilt of abandoning her old self stung, but the fire of her ancestors' gift burned brighter. They had seen her pain, granted her this chance, and she would not waste it. Reaching the edge of the village, Grace paused, her gaze fixed on the house where Jack and his mother waited. Her heart pounded, a mix of fear and exhilaration. She was no longer the naive city girl who had married a liar. She was a force reborn to deliver justice. Her first step would be to shift the narrative, to ensure the village saw her as the victim and Jack's family as the villains. She would cry if needed, shout if it served her, but every move would be calculated. Jack's mother would face the shame Grace had endured. Jack and Emily would lose the village's respect, and Pay Grace would draw him in his authority, her path to freedom. As she steeled herself, the wind carried the scent of the fields, a reminder of the life she would leave behind. This was her moment, the spark of a revenge that would burn through the village, and she was ready to set it ablaze. Grace approached the ramshackle house, its peeling walls a grim reminder of the life she had endured for Jack's family. Her heart pounded, a volatile mix of rage and resolve, as she prepared to ignite her revenge. The muddy path ended at the doorstep, where the scent of roasted peanuts drifted out, a bitter symbol of Jack's mother's greed. In her past life, Grace had starved while the older woman hoarded food, her insults a daily torment. Now reborn with the truth of their betrayal, Grace was no longer the dutiful wife who swallowed pain in silence. She was a storm ready to unleash her fury, but she had to be cunning. Today she would confront Jack and his mother not with raw anger, but with a calculated performance to turn the village against them. Inside, Jack lounged at the table, cracking peanuts beside his mother, who stuffed the leftovers into her pocket with a practiced flick. The sight ignited Grace's anger, but she buried it beneath a mask of distress. Her ancestors' vision had given her this chance, and she would not waste it on impulsive outbursts. She needed the village to see her as the wronged wife, not a madwoman. Taking a shaky breath, she let tears well in her eyes, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Jack, please don't drive those trucks. What if something happens? You'd leave me a widow, our baby fatherless." Her words were a plea, but her eyes intently watched their reactions. Jack froze his fingers, pausing mid-crack while his mother's face twisted in confusion. They exchanged a glance caught off guard by Grace's sudden shift. In her past life, she had urged Jack to chase a career, believing it would secure their future. Now she used that memory against him, planting the seeds of doubt. "Grace," Jack said, frowning, "didn't you say a man should make something of himself?" His mother chimed in, her voice sharp. "Exactly. You told him to go out and provide." "What's this nonsense now?" Grace's tears fell faster, and her performance was flawless. "I was wrong, Mom," she sobbed, clutching her belly. "What if he dies out there? You lost a son once and didn't care. But what about me? What about our child?" The accusation hit like a whip. Jack's mother stiffened her hand, clutching the hidden peanuts, while Jack's face darkened with unease. Grace's heart raced, a mix of triumph and turmoil. She hated this act, the pretense of weakness, but it was necessary. In her past life, she had been too proud to beg, too proper to fight dirty. That pride had let them trample her. Now she embraced the role of the desperate wife, knowing it would shift the village's sympathy. But the act stirred a deeper pain. She remembered her parents' warnings, their tearful pleas not to marry Jack. "You're meant for better," her mother had said. Grace had ignored them, and the guilt of that choice gnawed at her. She vowed to make them proud this time, to escape this village and reclaim her life. Pushing past her doubts, Grace raised her voice, stepping toward the door. "I won't let you go, Jack. I won't let your mother send you to your death." She stormed outside, her sobs echoing through the village. Neighbors peeked from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Grace's heart pounded with exhilaration. She was no longer invisible. She pointed back at the house, her voice carrying across the dusty street. "Jack wants to abandon his pregnant wife and his mother. Come judge for yourselves. How are we supposed to survive if he leaves?" The crowd grew, whispers spreading like wildfire. Grace's performance was working, but inside she wrestled with her transformation. Could she live with this version of herself, a woman who manipulated and schemed? The memory of her deathbed, Jack's smug face beside Emily, steeled her resolve. She had no choice but to fight fire with fire. Jack's mother followed her out, her face red with indignation. "Grace, stop this madness. You're shaming us." But Grace spun on her tears, streaming. "Shame. You're the one pushing your son to leave, not caring if he dies. What kind of mother are you?" The villagers murmured, their eyes narrowing at the older woman. Grace's chest tightened with a mix of guilt and satisfaction. She hated stooping to their level, but the power of turning the narrative was intoxicating. She saw Emily approaching, her confident stride faltering as she noticed the crowd. Grace's blood boiled. Emily, the woman who had stolen Jack and mocked her on her deathbed. This was only the beginning. Grace would ensure the village saw them all for what they were, deceivers who had used and discarded her. With each step she shed the naive girl she had been, embracing the warrior within, ready to burn their world to the ground. Grace stood at the village entrance, her heart a furnace of rage and resolve, her tear-streaked face a mask of calculated despair. The crowd of villagers grew, their murmurs a rising tide that fueled her performance. She had ignited the spark of her revenge, accusing Jack and his mother of abandoning her, a pregnant wife, for his reckless trucking dreams. Now she would fan the flames, turning the village's sympathy into a weapon against her betrayers. The dusty air carried the weight of her words, and she felt the shift eyes, once indifferent, now watched with curiosity and judgment. But beneath her act, a storm of emotions churned. Could she truly become this woman who thrived on chaos and confrontation? The Grace of her past life, who had swallowed insults for peace, recoiled at the thought. Yet the memory of Jack's smug face, Emily's mocking smile, and her children's betrayal on her deathbed silenced her doubts. This was her justice, and she would claim it. Jack wants to leave me and his mother to fend for ourselves, Grace cried, her voice breaking with feigned anguish. I'm carrying his child. He'd rather chase riches than stay with us. The villagers whispered gazes darting toward Jack's house, where he and his mother stood frozen in the doorway. Grace's chest tightened with a mix of triumph and guilt. She hated this pretense, the shedding of her dignity, but it was necessary. She had been too proud to fight back in her past life, which cost her everything. Now she channeled her pain into a performance, her tears a tool to sway the crowd. She thought of her parents, their warnings about Jack echoing in her mind. You'll regret it, her father had said, his voice heavy with fear. She had ignored them, and the shame of that choice lingered. She would make them proud this time, using her city household registration to escape and rebuild. Jack stepped forward, his face a mask of irritation. Grace, have you lost your mind? You begged me to make a career for us. His words were meant to deflect, but Grace seized them. A career? You're running off with her. She pointed at Emily, who had just appeared, her confident stride faltering under the crowd's scrutiny. Emily's presence was like a spark to dry tinder. Grace's blood boiled, the image of Emily beside Jack on her deathbed searing her mind. Without hesitation, she strode forward and slapped Emily hard across the face, the crack echoing in the stunned silence. You shameless homewrecker, Grace shouted, grabbing Emily's collar and delivering another slap. You think you can steal my husband and leave me to rot? The crowd gasped, some nodding in agreement, others whispering about Emily's reputation. Emily stumbled, her cheeks, red tears welling in her eyes. Grace's heart raced with exhilaration, but a pang of unease pierced her. She had never been violent, never stooped to such raw aggression. Grace, who loved Jack and dreamed of a quiet family life, would have recoiled from this act. But that Grace had died, betrayed, and broken. Reborn by her ancestors' will, this Grace embraced the fire within. She turned to the village chief, Emily's father, who clutched a lottery scroll nearby. Your daughter's been chasing my husband, and you do nothing, Grace accused, her voice carrying across the square. What kind of chief lets his family ruin mine? The chief's face reddened, his patriarchal pride wounded. Emily would never... He snapped, but the crowd's murmurs grew louder, their doubts surfacing. Grace's eyes flicked to Jack's mother, who hovered behind Jack, her expression a mix of shock and fury. And you, Grace pointed, her voice dripping with venom. You'd send your son to his death for money, leaving me and my baby to suffer. The villagers' whispers turned to open agreement, some calling the older woman heartless. Grace's performance was working, but inside she wrestled with her transformation. She had become a force of chaos, a far cry from the woman who had once valued dignity above all. Yet the power of turning the village against her enemies was intoxicating, a balm to the wounds of her past. Emily's mother, the chief's wife, stepped forward, her hands on her hips. You're the shameless one, clinging to a man who doesn't want you. Who knows if that baby's even Jack's? The accusation stung, but Grace laughed, a cold, defiant sound. I'm his legal wife, and you dare call my child illegitimate. Meanwhile, your daughter throws herself at a married man. The crowd erupted, some shouting about the chief's corrupt ways, others decrying Emily's behavior. Grace's heart swelled with grim satisfaction. She had flipped the narrative, making Jack's family and the chief the villains. But as she stood amidst the chaos, a flicker of her old self lingered, questioning if this path would consume her. She pushed it aside, her ancestor's voice echoing, vengeance is a heavy burden. She would bear it for the sake of the life she deserved. Grace stood in the village square, the echoes of her confrontation with Emily and Jack's mother still ringing. The crowd's murmurs had turned to open support, their judgment falling on the village chief's family and Jack's mother like a heavy fog. Her heart thrummed with a mix of triumph and unease. She had flipped the narrative, painting herself as the wronged wife, but the cost of her transformation weighed on her. The Grace of her past life, who valued dignity and peace, would have shunned this public spectacle. Now reborn with her ancestors' gift, she embraced the chaos, knowing it was her path to justice. But she needed more than village gossip to escape this village and destroy her enemies. She needed power, which stood before her in the form of Secretary Pay, a county official whose visit had drawn the curious crowd. Pay was a striking figure, tall and broad-shouldered. his tailored suit a sharp contrast to the villager's worn clothes. His eyes, sharp yet kind, scanned the scene with a quiet authority. Grace had heard of him in her past life, a man of integrity risen from humble roots driven by a deep disdain for corruption after watching his own family suffer under crooked officials. His ambition to reform the county made him both respected and feared. Grace saw her chance. If she could win his sympathy, his influence could secure her divorce, protect her city household registration, and amplify her revenge. But as she prepared to approach him, a pang of guilt twisted in her chest. Manipulating a good man felt wrong, a betrayal of the values her parents had instilled. Yet the memory of Jack's smug face, Emily's mocking smile, and her children's cold dismissal on her deathbed silenced her doubts. She had to play this game to win. Grace approached Pei, her eyes brimming with tears which she summoned with practiced ease. Secretary Pei said, her voice trembling, "My life here is unbearable. My husband's leaving me for another woman, and I'm pregnant with his child. I'm trapped and I need help." The words were half truth, half performance, designed to stir Pei's sense of justice. His brow furrowed, his gaze softening as he took in her tear-streaked face and swollen belly. Comrade said, his voice steady but warm, "Tell me who's wronged you. I'll see what I can do." Grace's heart leapt. His response was exactly what she needed, but inside she wrestled with her actions. She had once been a woman who believed in honesty and loved Jack despite his lies. Now she was weaving a web of manipulation using Pei's honor against him. The guilt gnawed at her, but she pushed it down, her ancestor's voice echoing forge a new path. This was her path, and she would walk it. The village chief, Emily's father, stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. "Grace, don't spread lies in front of Secretary Pei. My daughter would never do such a thing." His patriarchal bluster only fueled Grace's resolve. She turned to Pei, her voice breaking with feigned despair. "It's Emily, the chief's daughter. She's been chasing my husband, and he's planning to run off with her. I'm begging you to help me save my marriage." Pei's eyes narrowed, his distrust of the chief evident. In his past, he had seen men like the chief abuse power, hoarding resources, while families like his starved. Grace's story resonated, stirring his protective instincts. "If this is true," he said, "I'll investigate. You have my word." Grace nodded, her tears falling freely, though inside she felt a surge of triumph. She had hooked him, but the victory was bittersweet. She was using a good man's principles to serve her vengeance, and the weight of that choice settled heavily on her heart. As the crowd dispersed, Grace lingered, her gaze locked on Pei. She thought of her parents, their warnings about Jack ringing in her ears. "You're meant for better," her mother had said, her voice thick with love. Grace had ignored them, and the shame of that betrayal lingered. Now she betrayed Pei's trust, even for a greater cause. Could she live with this version of herself, a woman who schemed and deceived? The memory of her deathbed, the cold laughter of Jack and Emily steeled her resolve. She had no choice but to fight fire with fire. Pei's influence was her key to freedom, a way to protect her city registration and escape the village's clutches. "Thank you, Secretary Pei," she said softly, her voice laced with gratitude and guile. "I have nowhere else to turn." He nodded, his expression resolute, unaware of the storm he was entering. Grace turned away, her heart a battlefield of guilt and determination, ready to wield Pei's power to burn her enemy's world. Grace led Secretary Pei through the village's outskirts, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. The grove ahead, shaded by gnarled trees, was where she knew Jack and Emily would be, their stolen moments, a secret she had suspected in her past life but never confronted. Now armed with her ancestors' gift of rebirth, she was ready to expose their betrayal and cement Pei's alliance. The dusty path crunched under her feet, each step a reminder of the life she was dismantling. She glanced at Pei, his tall frame steady beside her, his eyes sharp with the resolve of a man who had fought his way up from poverty, driven by a hatred of corruption and injustice. Grace's plan hinged on his sense of duty, but inside she wrestled with the cost of her actions. Could she live with manipulating a good man, using his honor to fuel her vengeance? Pei's presence was a stark contrast to the village's decay. His suit, though simple, spoke of authority, and his calm demeanor hid a fire Grace had glimpsed when she shared her plight. She had learned in her past life that Pei's family had suffered under corrupt officials, his father had been cheated out of land, and his mother had been forced to beg. That pain had forged him into a man who valued justice, making him the perfect ally and dangerous if he saw through her guile. As they neared the grove, Grace's emotions churned. The Grace of her past life, who had loved Jack and dreamed of a family, would have recoiled at this scheming. Now reborn, she embraced it, but the guilt lingered. Her parents' warnings echoed in her mind. "Jack will ruin you," her mother had pleaded. Grace had ignored them, and the shame of that choice fueled her resolve. She would make them proud, but at what cost to her soul? "Stay quiet," Grace whispered, guiding Pei to a cluster of trees. Her hand brushed his, a deliberate gesture to draw him closer, and she felt him tense, his warmth a fleeting comfort. They crouched behind the foliage, and there in a clearing were Jack and Emily locked in a passionate kiss. Grace's heart twisted the sight, confirming her past life suspicions. Jack's hand stroked Emily's cheek, his voice tender. "Did it hurt when she hit you?" he asked, full of concern. Emily sniffled, her voice whiny. "Of course it hurt. She's your wife, but she can't treat me like that." Grace's blood boiled, but she held still, gripping Pei's hand to keep him from moving. They needed to hear more. Jack's voice lowered, conspiratorial. "Don't worry, we've planned it all. My mother will pretend to be paralyzed, so Grace stays home, raises the kid, and takes care of her. We'll run long-haul routes together, build our life. Grace will be stuck miserable forever." Emily giggled, her tears drying. "I don't want her having your kid, Jack," he smirked. "If she's a widow and remarries, she might escape. But with kids and my mother, she's trapped. No one will want her." Pei's jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with disgust. Grace's heart raced, a mix of vindication and pain. Jack's words echoed her past life's torment, but hearing them now with Pei as witness was a triumph. Yet guilt gnawed at her. She was using Pei's outrage, his past wounds, to serve her ends. Grace squeezed Pei's hand, stopping him as he moved to confront them. "Not yet," she whispered, her voice trembling with strategy and emotion. She needed this moment to solidify his support, to make him her shield against Jack's family. But as she held his hand, its warmth steadying her, she felt a flicker of something more profound, perhaps gratitude, or a longing for the connection she had lost in her past life. Her parents' faces flashed in her mind, their love a distant ache. She had cut them off, too ashamed to admit her marriage's failure. Now she was manipulating another to escape that failure, and the weight of that choice pressed on her. "Let's go," she murmured, pulling Pei back. "You've seen enough." Pei's face was grim as they retreated, his silence heavy with resolve. "This is unacceptable," he said finally. "I can help you annul your marriage if you want." Grace nodded, tears spilling over, not all of them feigned. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "I want a chance to live again." Inside, she battled her conscience. Pei's offer was her path to freedom, but it came at the cost of his trust. The Grace who had once valued honesty was fading, replaced by a woman forged in betrayal, ready to wield any weapon to destroy her enemies. As they walked back to the village, the grove's shadows behind them, Grace steeled herself. Jack and Emily's secret was exposed, Pei was her ally, and her revenge was taking shape. But the question lingered, could she bear the burden of the woman she was becoming? Grace sat in the dim county hospital, her hands clasped tightly over her swollen belly, the cold metal of the examination table seeping through her thin dress. The decision to abort her pregnancy weighed on her like a stone, a choice born of rage and resolve, but laced with a grief she hadn't anticipated. In her past life, she had carried Jack's twins to term, raising them through hunger and hardship, only to watch them betray her, calling Emily their mother on her deathbed. Now, reborn by her ancestors' grace, she refused to repeat that cycle. This barely formed child was a chain to Jack's legacy, a burden she would not bear again. Yet, as she waited for the procedure, her heart ached with doubt. Could she erase this life without losing a piece of herself? Secretary Pei stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the sterile room. His tall frame loomed protectively, his eyes soft with concern. Grace had drawn him into her plan, leveraging his sense of justice after witnessing Jack and Emily's affair in the Grove. His outrage at their betrayal, rooted in his history of fighting corruption, had made him her ally. But now, as he held her gaze, she saw something more: genuine care, perhaps even affection. It stirred a longing she hadn't felt in years, a reminder of the love she had once sought with Jack, only to be deceived. Her parents' warnings echoed in her mind. He's not what he seems. Her mother had said, tears in her eyes. Grace had ignored them, and the shame of that choice lingered. This time she would choose differently, but the cost of this choice ending a life cut deeper than she expected. Grace Pei said softly, his voice breaking her reverie. "You don't have to do this if you're unsure." His hand rested lightly on her shoulder, warm and reassuring. Grace shook her head, her voice trembling. I can't keep it, Pay. If I do, I'll be trapped again raising Jack's child while he lives free with her. The words were valid, but they hid her more profound fear that motherhood would soften her resolve, tether her to a past she was desperate to escape. In her past life, she had poured her love into her children only to be discarded. Now she saw this child as a symbol of that betrayal, a reminder of Jack's lies. Yet as she spoke, tears welled not just for the child but for the woman she had been, naive, hopeful, broken. Pei's eyes softened further, his pain flickering. I understand, he said. My mother lost a child to poverty, forced to choose survival over love. You're stronger than you know. His words, rooted in his family's struggles, struck a chord. Grace gripped his hand, her nails digging in as the doctor approached with cold instruments. She refused anesthesia, needing to feel the pain to etch this moment into her bones as a reminder of her liberation. The procedure began, the sharp scrape of metal against her flesh, a physical echo of her emotional torment. She clenched Pei's hand, her tears falling silently, each one a release of the grief she had carried for decades. She mourned not just the child, but the dreams she had once held, the family she had believed in, the love she had given to Jack. As the pain peaked, Grace's mind flashed to her parents. She had cut them off in her past life, too ashamed to admit her marriage's failure. Their love had been her anchor, yet she had pushed it away, choosing Jack's false promises. Now she vowed to reconnect and make them proud with a reclaimed life. But this choice of severing Jack's hold felt like a betrayal of her old self, the Grace who had believed in sacrifice. The pain ebbed and she gasped, her body trembling. Pei leaned closer, whispering, You're not alone. You'll have a future, Grace, I promise. His voice, steady and sure, was a lifeline. She clung to it, her heart torn between gratitude and guilt. She used Pei, his honor, a tool in her revenge. But his kindness stirred something more profound, a hope for redemption beyond vengeance. When it was over, Grace lay still, her body empty, her soul raw. Pei helped her sit up, his hand gentle as he offered her water. He said you did what you had to, his eyes searching hers. Grace nodded, her voice weak. I couldn't let him win again. But inside she questioned the cost. Had she lost more than a child today? The Grace who had loved unconditionally was fading, replaced by a woman hardened by betrayal. Yet, as Pei's hand lingered on hers, she felt a spark of possibility. He was her ally, perhaps more, and with his support she could escape the village, protect her city registration, and destroy Jack's family. The memory of her ancestors' vision steadied her, forge a new path. This was her path, painful, ruthless, but hers. As she rose, leaning on Pei, Grace vowed to carry this pain as fuel, ready to burn her enemy's world to ash. Grace returned to the village, her body still tender from the hospital procedure, but her spirit ablaze with purpose. The muddy path to Jack's house stretched before her, each step declaring her newfound power. She had severed the tie to Jack's legacy by ending her pregnancy, a painful but necessary act to break free from her past life's chains. Now, with Secretary Pei's support, she was ready to dismantle the lives of those who had betrayed her, Jack's mother, Emily, and the village chief's family. The village air was thick with gossip, the aftermath of her public confrontation still lingering. Grace's heart pounded with a mix of triumph and unease. She had become a force of vengeance, but the woman she once was, kind, hopeful, bound by duty, haunted her, whispering the moral cost of her actions. Jack's mother sat inside the house at the table, her face twisted with indignation as she counted a meager pile of peanuts. The sight of her greed, unchanged from Grace's past life, ignited a cold fury. Grace's plan was clear: take control, reclaim resources, and turn the village's judgment against the older woman. She strode to the food storage, unlocked it with a guarded key, and took the white flour and eggs meant for market. Ignoring the older woman's glare, Grace began preparing a meal for herself, the act a deliberate defiance. What are you doing? Jack's mother snapped, banging her fist on the table. Those are for selling. Grace met her eyes, her voice calm but sharp. I'm pregnant, or was. I need to eat. Your grandson would have wanted it. The lie stung, but served her purpose, twisting the older woman's manipulation against her. Grace's heart wavered as she cracked the eggs. In her past life, she had starved to feed this family, her sacrifices met with curses. Now she was reclaiming what was hers, but the act felt like a betrayal of her old self, the Grace who had valued sacrifice. She thought of her parents, their tearful warnings about Jack. He'll drain you, her father had said. She had ignored them, and the guilt of that choice lingered. She would make them proud this time, using her city household registration to escape and rebuild. But as she ate, the taste of defiance was bittersweet. Was she becoming as ruthless as those she despised? Her ancestor's voice echoed, "Vengeance is a heavy burden." She would bear it, but it weighed on her soul. News of Jack and Emily's death in a landslide reached the village, a rumor Grace had anticipated from her past life's knowledge. She seized the moment, storming to the village chief's house, her grief a calculated performance. "Your daughter lured my husband to his death," she shouted, clutching her belly as if the loss were fresh. "And your wife pushed me, killed my baby." The crowd gathered, whispers turning to accusations against the chief's family. The chief, his face pale, tried to deflect. "Grace, you're mistaken. Emily's innocent." But Grace's voice rose, cutting through his lies. "Innocent? She was with Jack, and now they're dead. You owe me for my child, my husband." The villagers nodded, distrust of the chief's corruption fueling their support. Inside, Grace's emotions churned. She hated this act, the pretense of victimhood, but it was working. Fearing for his position, the chief offered 300 yuan to silence her. Grace accepted, her eyes cold. "This doesn't absolve you," she said, pocketing the money. She then returned to Jack's house, searching the rafters where she knew the older woman hid her savings. Finding the stash, Grace took it, her heart racing with grim satisfaction. Jack's mother wailed, lunging to stop her, but Grace pushed her back. "You pushed Jack to leave, and now he's gone. This is your fault." The older woman's screams followed her, but Grace felt no pity. She had endured years of her curses. Now the tables were turned. As she prepared to leave, Grace faced the village chief again, his wife groveling at her feet. "Please don't report us," she begged. Grace smirked, her voice icy. "Pay up and I'm gone, but I'll be at the county office if I hear a word against me." The chief handed over the money, his glare venomous but powerless. Grace's heart swelled with triumph, but a shadow lingered. She had become a woman who extorted and stole, a far cry from the Grace her parents had raised. Yet the memory of her deathbed, Jack's betrayal, and Emily's smugness drove her forward. With the money and her marriage certificate, Grace walked away from the village, her city registration and her ticket to freedom. Pei waited in town, and with him, a new life. But as she left, she wondered, could she live with the fire she had become, or would it consume her? Grace stepped into the county town, the dusty village path, now a memory fading behind her. The weight of the 300 yuan and Jack's mother's stolen savings pressed against her chest, a tangible victory in her war against those who had betrayed her. Secretary Pei's small villa, nestled in the government compound, loomed ahead, its clean lines starkly contrasting the village's decay. With Jack and Emily dead in the rumored landslide, Grace could start anew, her city household registration, her lifeline to a better life. Yet as she approached Pei's door, her heart churned with conflicting emotions. She had won her revenge, but at what cost? The Grace who had once dreamed of love and family was buried beneath layers of rage and guile, and she wondered if she could reclaim the woman her parents had raised. Pei greeted her, his tall frame filling the doorway, his eyes warm but searching. "You're back," he said, his voice laced with relief. "I was worried." His concern stirred a flicker of warmth in Grace, a feeling she hadn't known since her parents' embrace years ago. In her past life, she had cut them off, too ashamed to admit her marriage to Jack was a mistake. Their warnings, "He'll ruin you," her mother had pleaded, had proven true, and the guilt of ignoring them haunted her. Now, with Pei's support, she had a chance to rebuild, but the shadow of her vengeful actions lingered. Had she become too ruthless, too far from the daughter her parents loved? She pushed the thought aside, stepping into the villa where a housekeeper offered her a bowl of black-bone chicken soup fragrant with ginseng. "Young masters never brought anyone home," the housekeeper said, smiling. "This is for you." Grace sipped the soup, its warmth soothing her still tender body. Pei had secured her a job at a local work unit, a clerical position that leveraged her city registration's privileges. He had also enrolled her in night classes, a path to the education she had abandoned for Jack. As she sat, Pei watched her, his gaze steady. "You deserve better than that village," he said. "I've seen too many women trapped by men like Jack. My mother was one cheated by officials who took everything. I won't let that happen to you." His words, rooted in his pain, deepened Grace's gratitude and guilt. She had manipulated his sense of justice, yet his kindness offered a glimpse of redemption. She wanted to believe in this new beginning, but her actions weighed on her heart. The next day, Grace took a bus to her parents' city apartment, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. She hadn't seen them since her wedding, and her shame kept her away. Standing at their door, she felt like a child again, seeking forgiveness. Her mother opened the door, her face lighting up before crumpling into tears. "Grace, my girl," she whispered, pulling her into a hug. Her father joined them, his stern eyes softening. "We heard about Jack," he said gruffly. "You should have listened, but you're here now." Grace's tears fell as she apologized, her voice breaking. "I was wrong. I should have stayed with you. But I'm free now, and I'll make you proud." Her parents' embrace was a balm, healing the wound of her past isolation. They approved of Pepe, seeing his ambition and care as a sign of Grace's new path. Back at Pei's villa, Grace settled into her new life, her days filled with work and study. The routine was grounding, but questions haunted her nights. Could she leave her vengeance behind and embrace this chance at happiness? The Grace who had loved Jack was gone, replaced by a woman hardened by betrayal. Yet Pei's presence, his quiet support, his belief in her stirred hope. She thought of her ancestors' vision, their warning about vengeance's burden. Had she paid enough, or was her heart still tethered to the village's pain? Colleagues whispered about her past at work, but Grace held her head high, her city registration a shield, her parents' love a foundation. Pei's villa became a haven, and as she studied by lamplight, she felt the stirrings of a new self, strong, educated, worthy of the life her parents had envisioned. Yet as she lay in bed, Grace's mind wandered to the village. Jack's mother, now destitute, and the chief's family, shamed by her accusations, were paying for their sins. But the victory felt hollow against the guilt of her ruthlessness. She had used PayPal, extorted the chief, and stolen from an older woman. Was this the woman she wanted to be? Her parents' faces, now warm with pride, reminded her why she fought. She was no longer the village's victim. With Pei's support and her parents' love, Grace was rebuilding, but the fire of her revenge still smoldered, a reminder that her new beginning was built on the ashes of her old life. Grace stood in the county courthouse, her hands steady as she signed the papers dissolving her marriage to Jack. 2 years had passed since his death in the rumored landslide, and the court had declared him legally missing, freeing her from the chains of her past life. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and Grace, now in her late 20s, felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Her city household registration, untouched by Jack's greedy family, had been her lifeline, securing her a job and education. Secretary Pei stood beside her, his presence a quiet strength, his eyes warm with pride. Their wedding was planned for the following week, a new chapter she had once thought impossible. Yet as she handed the papers to the clerk, her heart churned with triumph and unease. She had won, but the cost of her vengeance lingered a shadow on her newfound peace. Her life with Pei had blossomed in the county town. Her job at the work unit, bolstered by night classes, had transformed her into a confident woman, her skills earning respect despite whispered rumors of her past. Pei's support had been unwavering, his belief in her rooted in his history of overcoming hardship. He had shared stories of his mother's struggles, cheated by corrupt officials, and his vow to protect those like Grace from similar fates. Their bond had deepened, and their son, now a lively toddler, filled their small villa with laughter. Grace's reconciliation with her parents had been a balm, their pride in her resilience healing old wounds. At a recent visit, her mother had hugged her tightly, whispering, "You've made us proud, Grace." Her father, once stern, had nodded, his eyes glistening. "You're stronger than we ever knew." Their love anchored her, but the memory of her vengeful acts, extorting the village chief, stealing from Jack's mother, gnawed at her conscience. News from the village trickled in, painting a grim picture of her enemy's downfall. Jack's mother, once a scheming tyrant, had become truly paralyzed, her body succumbing after years of feigned illness. Abandoned by her son, she had died alone, her savings stolen by Grace, her reputation in tatters. The village whispered of her cruelty, blaming her for pushing Jack to his death. Grace's heart stirred with satisfaction, but also a pang of guilt. She had wanted the older woman to suffer, but the reality of her lonely end felt hollow. The Grace who had once valued kindness would have pitied her. The Grace reborn for vengeance felt only cold justice. Her parents' voices echoed in her mind, urging her to rise above hate, but the fire of her past life's betrayal still smoldered, demanding closure. Emily's fate, once uncertain, had crystallized. Word reached Grace that Emily had survived the landslide only to become a mistress to a wealthy merchant in a distant city. Her beauty had secured her a comfortable life, but came at a cost. After bearing a child, she was cast aside and her reputation was ruined. She had died abroad alone and forgotten her dreams of grandeur reduced to ashes. Grace's heart twisted at the news, not with pity, but with a grim sense of finality. Emily, who had mocked her on her deathbed, had paid for her betrayal, but the victory felt empty. Had Grace's vengeance consumed too much of her soul? She thought of her ancestors' warning. Vengeance is a heavy burden. She had borne it, but at what price to the woman she was becoming? Pay noticed her silence as they left the courthouse, his hand finding hers. "You're free now, Grace," he said, his voice gentle. "The past is gone." She nodded, forcing a smile, but inside she wrestled with her transformation. Grace, who loved Jackin and dreamed of a simple family, was a ghost replaced by a woman hardened by pain and cunning. Yet Pay's love, her parents' pride, and her son's laughter offered a path to redemption. She had rebuilt her life, her career, thriving, her beauty now tempered with confidence. The village, with its betrayals and suffering, was a distant memory, but its lessons lingered. She had fought for justice, but the guilt of her ruthless methods, manipulating Pei, shaming the chief, stealing from an older woman, haunted her. As they walked to their villa, Grace's son ran to her, his tiny arms wrapping around her legs. She lifted him, his warmth easing the ache in her heart. Pei smiled, his possessiveness softened by affection. "You've given me everything," he said, kissing her forehead. Grace's eyes welled, not with sorrow, but with hope. She had triumphed over her enemies, their lives ruined while hers flourished. Yet holding her son, she vowed to let go of the vengeance that had driven her. Her true victory was her parents' love, Pei's support, and her child's future. The village was behind her, with it the Grace she had buried. She was ready to embrace closure, to live for the life she had reclaimed. Grace stood on the bustling city street, her tailored skirt suit hugging her frame, her soft makeup accentuating a beauty refined by time and triumph. At 42, she was a vision of sophistication, her presence commanding respect in the urban office where she now held a senior position. The city's hum, vibrant and alive, was a world away from the muddy village paths of her past. Beside her, Secretary Pei, now a city official, walked with a possessive arm around her, his love unwavering despite the years. Their son, a lively college student, dashed ahead, his laughter a reminder of the family she had built. As Grace gazed at them, her heart swelled with a peace she had once thought impossible. Yet beneath her polished exterior, the echoes of her vengeful journey lingered, a quiet reminder of the woman she had become to reclaim her life. Her life was a tapestry of success woven from the ashes of her past. After divorcing Jack, Grace married Pei, and his support was a cornerstone in her rise. Her career had flourished, her night classes yielding skills that silenced doubters. Her parents, once estranged, were now a constant presence, their pride in her a healing balm. At a recent dinner, her mother had clasped her hand, tears in her eyes. "You've become everything we hoped," she said. His sternness softened. Her father added, "You're stronger than us all." Their love had mended the wounds of her past shame when she had ignored their warnings about Jack. But as Grace reflected, a shadow of guilt remained. She had achieved this life ruthlessly manipulating Pei, extorting the village chief, and stealing from Jack's mother. Could she reconcile the woman she was with, the one her parents had raised? The village's ghosts had fated their fates, a final note in Grace's revenge. Jack, once a charming deceiver, had returned, broken, his dreams of wealth shattered. Grace had seen him once in a mental hospital, his gaunt frame hunched as he muttered, "It wasn't supposed to be like this. My money, my child. Grace stole it all." His words, laced with delusion, brought her no joy, only a cold satisfaction. His mother, truly paralyzed in her final years, had died alone, her savings gone, her reputation ruined by Grace's accusations. Emily, the village chief's daughter, had met a grim end. After surviving the landslide, she had become a merchant's mistress, only to be discarded after bearing a child. She died abroad, penniless and forgotten, her beauty faded, her ambitions dust. The village chief and his wife had passed their legacy tarnished by scandal. Grace's heart stirred at these truths, not with pity, but with closure. Her enemies had paid their lives, a mirror of the misery they had inflicted on her. Yet as Grace walked with Pei and their son, she grappled with the cost of her vengeance. The Grace of her past life, who had loved Jack and dreamed of a simple family, would have recoiled at her actions, slapping Emily, extorting money using Pei's honor. That Grace was gone, buried under the pain of betrayal, but her ghost lingered, questioning if vengeance had hardened her too much. Her ancestors' vision, granting her rebirth, had warned vengeance is a heavy burden. She had borne it, but it had left scars. Pei's hand tightened on hers, sensing her quiet mood. "You're thinking of the past," he said, his voice low. "Let it go, Grace. You're here now." His love, possessive yet steadfast, grounded her. He had been her ally, her savior, but she had manipulated him too. The guilt of that choice lingered, yet his belief in her had rebuilt her life. Grace paused, watching her son weave through the crowd, his future bright with the opportunities her city registration had secured. She thought of her parents, their pride, a light in her darkness. The village, with its betrayals and suffering, was a distant memory, its lessons etched into her soul. She had fought for justice, turning the tables on those who had wronged her, but the fire of vengeance had nearly consumed her. Now, surrounded by love, success, and power, she let it go. Her son ran back grinning, and Grace lifted him, his warmth erasing the last shadows of her past. Pei kissed her forehead, his eyes fierce with devotion. "You've earned this," he said. Grace smiled, her heart finally free. She had reclaimed her life not just from Jack, but from the pain that had defined her. The beauty of the 21st century stretched before her, and she embraced it whole and unbroken, a woman reborn.